Leather is a natural, porous substance, and oftentimes, from day-to-day use, it's going to come in contact with all sorts of things, including paint. So we're going to check out exactly what happens when paint gets onto leather, the nature of it. We're going to look at a few different leather types in terms of an unprotected leather, a protected one, and a synthetic leather. And then we're going to walk through examples of cleaning each. So by the end, you'll have a great idea of how to remove paint from leather. So let's explore first the nature of paint on leather. So paint is a colored pigment, and it's essentially going to rest on the surface of the leather. And this makes it different than dyes. For example, dyes are going to penetrate deep into the fibers, whereas most paints are going to rest on the surface. And this makes it a lot easier, since instead of having to go in and trying to change anything internally, we're primarily focused on removing it just from the surface. And something really important to consider as well is that anytime you're removing paint from leather, it's essentially a risk-reward process. We want to use the right cleaners to remove the paint effectively. We also want to minimize the amount of damage that's done to the leather surface or the fibers itself. So let's check out a few different types of leather and see how the cleaning decision process might differ. So first up, we have a protected leather. This is an example of an epi leather that's often found on handbags and accessories. And you can see it's got these ridges. While it still has a natural leather base, on top is this surface coating. And that's going to create a barrier between the leather and anything that's on top. For example, this paint. So that's great. It's going to make things a little easier to clean as long as we are responsible about what this layer is. Another example is this faux or synthetic leather. It's not natural leather at all, so it's usually going to be a little easier than natural leather because the porosity or the pores in the surface are going to behave much differently when we're cleaning that. And then we have our natural unprotected leather. This one is going to be the trickiest, and we're going to show you exactly why. We're going to intentionally make some mistakes so you can see the risks of what can happen when cleaning this and see how some of the results may look in a short test. So with that, we have our protected leather, we have our synthetic leather, and we have our unprotected leather. So when cleaning, it's first key to determine what is the surface of that material. If you know that, maybe it's a vinyl surface, maybe it is a leather with a gloss or Resolene on top. There's so many leathers out there, so it's really going to be key to, in your context, in particular situation, if you can, to determine what that is going to be. And that's important because some of the solvents we may use could weaken, degrade, remove, or discolor some of those surface coatings. And so if you know what they are, you'll have an idea of which solvent may work better, may damage it the least, or more, there may be an alternative cleaner that could work just as well, that'll also keep that surface layer safe. So while I'd love to be able to say, here are all the layers and here's the best option, there are literally thousands of combinations that can be out there. So your best bet is going to be determine what you've got and then make a decision as to what is going to be a smart cleaning agent for that. So in our example, we're going to go through two agents and a few different application methods. One is going to be an isopropyl alcohol. This comes in 70, 90, and I think you can get 99% as well. This is going to be the lesser of the two strong. We also have acetone, 100% pure acetone. It's a very strong solvent, also known as nail polish remover. This will likely, help remove the paint, but also discolor leather and, cause some potential issues with surfaces as well. Not that isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol won't, though this will generally be a little less strong than this. Now let's check out application methods. So we've got a few different things here that can be used to apply your cleaners. And we're going to look at which ones are better than others. So with any kind of a solvent, it can potentially melt foam. So here we have a cosmetic sponge. While this is good for applying paint, it's not going to be so good for cleaning because a strong solvent can break down these foam bonds and actually make this relatively unusable. So we're going to put that aside. Next, we have these cotton rounds. They're often used for cosmetics and cleaning and things like that. They're a possibility to use, though sometimes little bits of fiber come off. So if you need them in a pinch, they might work, but just be aware about how much that fiber spreads to your leather. We have our tried and true Q-tips. These are going to usually make sure you have a cotton end to it, which is a natural fiber. And then while it does have some fuzzies that can come out, as long as you apply the cleaner well and kind of dab, then you should be overall in okay shape. Here we have our wool dauber. This is going to be the natural wool end on a small metal rod. And this can work well to apply your cleaner on it and then to rub on your leather. And then our tried and true cotton rag. This is just a lint-free cotton cloth. You cut these up, make them smaller or larger depending on how you need. And they're also not going to scratch your leather surface, which is going to be important to consider as well. All right, it is example time. So let's walk through cleaning our 3 examples of our synthetic leather, our coated leather, and our uncoated leather. We're going to get very different results between these 2 and this one, and I'll show you why, and also an insight into how tricky this one might be. So we'll start with our synthetic leather. I'll put down our foil here to protect our work surface. We'll put our leather over here. And for this, we're going to start with our simpler of 2 solvents, or our less strong, our isopropyl alcohol. And we're just going to take a cotton cloth. We're going to open up our alcohol and just do a little dab like that to get our cloth wet. Cap this up. And then we'll come over to our leather here and we'll kind of dab it a little bit to start to get it loose. And then we'll rub to get that off. And then we'll basically just do that again. Kind of let it penetrate a little bit. And we want to rub that off. There we go. Now we'll just do one more. And if you notice, it's picking up the paint. So if you're going to do multiple applications of it, make sure you turn the cloth around or use another cloth. That way you're not just redistributing that paint across your surface. And there we go. It's relatively simple. And we could see now our paint is gone and our synthetic leather is back to the way it was. Very easy. All right, next up is our coated leather. So this is the natural leather underneath with the epi coating on top. So again, we're going to get a cotton cloth here. We're going to take our rubbing alcohol and we're just going to get some on our cloth. And then again, we'll come down here and just kind of dab it for a minute, kind of let it get in there, start to do what it does. And then we'll just rub that off. And you can see that coming off already onto here. So again, if we're gonna get more, let's actually get another cloth here because we don't want to rub all that paint back in there. So we'll just come over here and then we'll just put more in and rub that off. We've got most of it gone now. So let's just take one more and make sure everything's gone. We didn't leave any residue behind. There we go. Let that dry, and the leather, and more importantly the coating, is back to the way it was. All right, next up is our unprotected leather. And this one is going to be tricky. So with unprotected leather, all of these pores are open. So when you get any kind of paints in there, even though it's resting mostly on the surface, it's going to get in there a teeny little bit. And then any cleaners that we're going to use are going to get in there. And anything that gets pushed around on the surface as we're cleaning is going to get pushed around those fibers as well. And some of it absorbed. So this is going to make it especially tricky to clean leather off of an unprotected surface. And we're going to show you how that looks and why. So first out, we're going to start with our rubbing alcohol. And for this, we're going to try our Q-tip method. This is because we don't want to rub everything around our leather surface. And I'll show you that as an example why, but let's start out with this method. So what we want to do is just kind of gently rest it on there. And if we start to kind of just gently rub and daub, we don't want to like rub too much, it's more dabbing. Because if we rub it around, it's going to move it around the surface. So you can start to see some of it's getting picked up now as we go. And then we've got and then if we do rub a little more, we're going to get more paint up. You can see that coming up. But now we're also moving that paint around. And you can see those fibers are really starting to kind of just drink in that rubbing alcohol. Even though our paint is getting removed a little bit, now we've got this big mark. Now obviously it's wet, so it's going to dry and evaporate. Let's just try a little more with this method. Gonna just get a little of that alcohol off so it isn't so concentrated. And then here we kind of daub and even rub a little bit. You notice when we're picking up the paint, we want to make sure we're not rubbing in other areas. So there's a little bit less paint, right? So we're working on it. And if you're going to do this process, you want to go really, really slow. Basically only dab, not rub, and change out your Q-tips often. So that way any paint that gets on there, you're not going to be redepositing it. But that's kind of the process for the alcohol on the unprotected leather. Now say we were to rub it. We're like, hey, I'm going to do that. So let's get some alcohol on our rag. And then we're going to rub it on this end. So what's going to happen is it's going to start to do what it does at like picking up that paint, but it's also going to start to spread it around now. And once this begins to dry, we're going to see little bits of more of that black around. And while that dries, let's look at our acetone. So here's our acetone, and it's a bit of a stronger solvent. So what we're going to do is I'll just show you how this works with our Q-tip. And I'll even do just some lines so you can see how it may discolor the leather. But what we'll do is we'll start working here. And it's going to be removing that much faster than the rubbing alcohol. Much, much faster. So you're going to have to change out your Q-tips more. Now say we do the same thing, but we are rubbing with it instead of just using our dabbing. So we're going to rub this. And we see that paint is coming out real fast. And you see for the most part where that was, you know, a lot of it's already removed. However, we're also going to notice when it dries that there's going to be some paint kind of moved around now. Little bits kind of got carried. And then along with that, we're going to see some staining and discoloration of the leather. And you could even see over here where we just did that little sample rub of only the acetone, the leather is discolored as well. So overall, when working with unprotected leather, it can be really, really tricky because we're dealing with those exposed fibers, and then the solvents that are generally going to be useful for removing the paint are also going to likely cause some other damage. So I've got one more idea to show you. Depending on the type of paint that's on there, it may be a water-based paint. In that case, you may be in a little more luck with an unprotected leather. So we're just going to try some water on a rag and see if we can begin to dilute it. Now that in mind, leather itself can get stained by water. And it may move around some of the components it may move around some of the tanning agents in there. So you may still end up with staining from the water itself. However, let's see if this might be an option to kind of remove some of that paint. We could see up here coming out a little bit, and it's a little bit less visible right there. So that's an option to potentially consider if you know it's a water-based paint and you don't mind a potential staining and a little bit of spreading. That may be a better option than some solvents. And then I'm going to suggest one more potential option, the magic eraser. So magic erasers, as we know, are essentially operate like little bits of sandpaper. And so it's going to remove the surface of your leather. That said, we're in a unique position where the paint is on the surface of the leather. So it may be a risk reward where you'd want to remove that paint and a little bit of the leather surface and then potentially condition or recolor it in some way to make it even with what's around it. While magic erasers usually aren't great for leather stain removal, I'm going to share it just as another option in context. And like most of these, you'll decide what can work best for yours. So let's magic eraser this paint. All right, that's the dry magic eraser. Now the way to use it properly is of course to wet it. So we're going to do that. Now we have our wet magic eraser and we're going to go to work. And you can see the paint starting to come off, as well as the, tanning agents and coloring from the leather. Though in general, the paint is starting to come off right there. And we could obviously repeat this process and do that more and see what it looks like as and when it's dry. So there you have a look into cleaning the different types of leather, removing the paint from them. Now that said, here are a few kind of closing thoughts. Mostly key is that depending on the type of leather it is, it may cause damage. So it's going to be that balance between, do we want that paint gone and what damage might it cause to the leather? Also, keep in mind that every decision is context relevant in terms of what you're looking to do, what you're comfortable with, and what's going to work for you. So some of these may not work at all. It's ultimately going to be something for you to get to decide for your project, what you may be comfortable with and what may work. So with most decisions, that's great because you get to decide for yourself. And additionally, as with most things, safety is always number one. So when working with any kind of solvents, any kind of cleaning or paint removal, do your research, learn what risks may be involved, and then always try to use a safe environment, ultimately deciding for yourself in any situation what's going to work best and what you're comfortable with for your situation. And safety is always first. And that's a few ways on how to remove paint from leather. And there you have it. Until next time.